I just shot my daughter." The words are calm, almost detached, as if the man on the other end of the line were confessing to breaking a dish rather than committing an unthinkable act. The voice belongs to Don Spirit, a father, a grandfather, and, as it would soon be revealed, the architect of one of the most horrifying crimes in Florida's history. The 911 dispatcher presses for details, their voice trembling. Slowly, the picture unfolds, a modest home in the rural town of Bell, Florida. 7 bodies. 3 generations. A family wiped out in a single afternoon. But why? What drives a man to destroy his own bloodline, to obliterate the very people who trusted him most? As the community reeled, investigators began to unearth a story that went far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Bell, Florida, was the kind of place where nothing much happened. A town of dirt roads and wide-open fields, where neighbors knew each other by name and heartbreak felt like something that belonged in faraway headlines. But on September 18, 2014, that illusion of safety was shattered. The crime scene was like something out of a nightmare, a small home now eerily silent, its walls bearing witness to unspeakable violence. Outside, Don Spirit waited on the porch, his voice calm as he spoke to the first officers on the scene. This was not just a crime. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind, a father turning against his family. But as investigators dug deeper, they found it wasn't a sudden explosion of violence. It was the culmination of years of generational trauma, missed warning signs, and systemic failures that allowed the unimaginable to happen. What happened that day in Bell, Florida, was more than a tragedy. It was a reckoning. It forced the community, and the rest of the nation, to confront uncomfortable truths about family, mental health, and the systems meant to protect the vulnerable. The answers to those questions would come slowly, revealed piece by piece like a puzzle too horrific to assemble in one sitting. But one thing was clear from the beginning. This was a story no one would ever forget. Don Spirit entered the world in 1963 in Florida, a state often celebrated for its sunshine and southern hospitality. But his early life told a darker story. His childhood home, while outwardly typical, was a place where affection was scarce and discipline was harsh. His father, a man of strict rules and stern words, left little room for softness, and his mother, overwhelmed by the demands of raising multiple children, often seemed distant. As a boy, Don learned early that vulnerability was a weakness and anger was a tool. This lesson, ingrained in him by a household defined by emotional detachment, would shape his worldview in dangerous ways. His teenage years were marked by turbulence. At school, he was known for his quick temper and confrontational demeanor. Classmates described him as someone who always seemed to be simmering just beneath the surface, ready to lash out at any perceived slight. Though he was physically capable and had a knack for mechanical work, Don lacked the patience and discipline to stick with tasks for long. His defiance often extended to authority figures. Teachers and coaches frequently clashed with him, and his academic record was riddled with suspensions for fighting and insubordination. Despite his anger issues, no one took the time to address the root of his behavior. By the time Don graduated, barely making it through high school, he was already on a path of self-destruction. His rage, which once found an outlet in teenage rebellion, began festering into something more dangerous. In his 20s, Don seemed to settle into a semblance of normalcy. He found work in manual labor, taking on jobs in construction and repair. Though skilled with his hands, his temper proved to be his greatest liability. Co-workers recalled moments when minor disagreements escalated into screaming matches or physical altercations. One former supervisor described him as a walking storm, calm one minute and explosive the next. Don married his first wife in his mid-20s, a union that would prove as volatile as the man himself. Friends of the couple remembered tense arguments that sometimes spilled into public view. Though there were moments of tenderness, his controlling nature and quick temper drove a wedge between them. The marriage ended in a bitter divorce, leaving Don more isolated than before. No event in Don Spirit's life would define him more than the death of his son, Kyle. In 2001, Don and Kyle embarked on a hunting trip, a father-son outing that was supposed to strengthen their bond. But in a single, devastating moment, everything changed. While cleaning his hunting rifle, Don made a fatal mistake. The gun discharged, and the bullet struck Kyle, killing him instantly. The scene was described as chaotic and heart-wrenching. Don's screams of anguish echoed through the forest, a harrowing sound that would haunt those who heard it. The incident was ruled an accident, but the emotional toll was staggering. Don, once a man prone to anger, now seemed consumed by guilt. Yet, instead of seeking help, he retreated further into himself. The anger that had always simmered within him now burned hotter, fueled by self-loathing and unresolved grief. In the years following Kyle's death, Don's life spiraled out of control. Arrest records from this period reveal a pattern of escalating violence and recklessness. He was charged with illegal firearm possession, a bitter irony given the circumstances of Kyle's death. Domestic violence became a recurring theme in his life, with Sarah, his daughter, often caught in the crossfire. One altercation led to a felony child abuse charge, though the details remain sealed. What is clear is that his temper was now more volatile than ever, and those closest to him bore the brunt of his rage. His growing instability did not go unnoticed by the community. Neighbors began to speak in hushed tones about the man who seemed to vacillate between moments of charm and terrifying outbursts. "You could see it in his eyes," one neighbor later recalled. "It was like he was fighting demons no one else could see." Don Spirit's actions fit a chilling profile studied by forensic psychologists, the family annihilator. These individuals, often men in their middle years, are driven by a toxic combination of control, despair, and perceived failure. For Don, the cracks in his life had grown into chasms. Financial troubles loomed, his relationships were fractured, and his guilt over Kyle's death lingered like a shadow he could never escape. Family annihilators often act in moments of crisis, viewing the destruction of their family as a twisted form of mercy or control. By 2014, Don Spirit had become a man hollowed out by loss and rage. His increasingly erratic behavior, paired with his unchecked access to firearms, created a deadly equation. Though those around him sensed something was wrong, no one could have predicted the horrific conclusion to his story. At the center of this family was Sarah Spirit, a 28-year-old mother determined to create a better life for her 6 children. Described by friends and family as resilient and nurturing, Sarah had faced her fair share of struggles. Yet, no matter how difficult her circumstances became, her children were her driving force, the light that kept her moving forward. The Spirit household, despite its challenges, was often filled with the laughter and chatter of young voices. Sarah's 6 children were a lively, hopeful group, each with a unique personality that brought color to the family dynamic. Caleb Coleman, 11, was thoughtful and protective, often taking on a leadership role among his siblings. He loved puzzles and building things, showcasing a sharp mind and a calm demeanor. Kylie Coleman, 9, was the artist of the family. Always sketching or singing, her creativity shone through in everything she did. She brought a sense of lightness to the family, her giggles often contagious. Jonathan Coleman, 8, was an adventurer at heart. His curiosity and boundless energy often led him on backyard expeditions, where he dreamed of discovering hidden treasures. Destiny Stewart, 5, was nurturing and kind, often mimicking her mother's care by tending to her younger siblings. She carried a warmth that touched everyone around her. Brandon Stewart, 4, was a ball of energy, his laughter filling every corner of the home. His love for toy trucks and his playful antics made him the family's entertainer. Alana Stewart, just 3 months old, was the newest addition. Her coos and smiles brought joy to her siblings, who doted on her endlessly. This lively group was the embodiment of innocence and potential, a future brimming with hope despite the hardships they faced. But beneath this warmth lay a darker reality. Don Spirit's presence in the family often brought tension. While he occasionally showed affection toward his grandchildren, his erratic behavior created a cloud of unease. Sarah, though fiercely protective of her children, had a strained relationship with her father. Years of unresolved conflict had left their bond frayed. The warning signs were there. Don's temper, once a simmer, now boiled over with increasing frequency. He often spoke in tones that veered between menacing and resigned, leaving those around him uncertain of his next move. Neighbors later recalled hearing raised voices from the Spirit home, but no one intervened. "It was just Don being Don," one neighbor remarked. "We didn't think it would come to this." The weeks leading up to September 18, 2014, carried an undercurrent of tension. Don's Spirit, already prone to mood swings, became increasingly withdrawn. He avoided neighbors, kept conversations brief, and spent long hours sitting silently on his porch. Family friends noticed the shift in his demeanor. "He seemed different," one acquaintance observed. "Quieter, like he was carrying something heavy inside. His paranoia, always present, appeared to worsen. He spoke less about the future and more about the past, fixating on old grievances and perceived slights. One of the most alarming signs came during an argument with Sarah just days before the massacre. Witnesses reported hearing Don yell at his daughter, his voice cracking with anger, "You don't know what I'm capable of." Yet even these ominous moments were dismissed by those who heard them. To those who had known Don for years, his volatility was nothing new. But hindsight would later paint these incidents in a far more chilling light. Sarah, ever the optimist, continued to bring her children to visit their grandfather. Despite their fraught relationship, she believed in maintaining family ties. She had no way of knowing that Don's internal storm was nearing its breaking point. By the morning of September 18th, the tension that had been building for years reached its devastating climax. The morning in Belle, Florida, began like any other. The sun rose lazily over vast stretches of farmland, casting its golden rays across the quiet streets and modest homes of the tiny rural town. Birds chirped in the trees, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, a serene backdrop to what would soon become a waking nightmare. Inside Don Spirit's home, the atmosphere was unervingly ordinary. Neighbors later recalled seeing him that morning, his demeanor unremarkable, his face betraying nothing. But beneath that veneer of normalcy lay a man gripped by dark intent. Don's preparations were methodical. The handgun, a weapon he should never have possessed given his criminal history, was cleaned and loaded with quiet precision. He moved through his home with a deliberate calm, as though each step brought him closer to an outcome he had already accepted. Outside, the world seemed blissfully unaware. The Spirit family, gathering for what they thought would be a normal day, interacted warmly, their voices carrying faintly across the yard. Sarah, always the devoted mother, ushered her children into the car, her tone light as she encouraged them to hurry. Caleb, ever the protector, helped his younger siblings, while baby Alana cooed softly in her carrier. The house itself, nestled along a dirt road, appeared unassuming. The peeling paint and overgrown grass gave no hint of the horrors it would soon conceal. The stillness of the rural setting, broken only by the occasional chirping of crickets or the hum of a passing truck, belied the storm brewing within its walls. When Sarah and her children arrived, Don greeted them with an ease that betrayed nothing of his intentions. He smiled, spoke softly, and welcomed them into the house. The children, excited to spend time with their grandfather, ran inside, their laughter filling the air. For a fleeting moment, the Spirit home felt like any other, a place of family, warmth, and connection. But Don's calm hid a calculated plan. He waited until the family was settled before carrying out his monstrous act. The first shot rang out like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile peace of the afternoon. Sarah was the first to fall. Her cries of confusion and pain echoed briefly before being silenced. The children, hearing the commotion, froze in terror. One by one, Don turned the gun on them, their pleas for mercy met with cold indifference. The scene inside the home was one of unthinkable carnage. Furniture lay overturned, evidence of a brief but desperate struggle. The walls bore silent witness to the unspeakable violence, streaked with the remnants of lives cut short. At 4 p.m., Don Spirit made the call that would sear his name into infamy. His voice, devoid of emotion, was chillingly calm as he confessed to the dispatcher. I just shot my daughter and her 6 kids." The simplicity of the statement, delivered with an almost casual detachment, was as horrifying as the act itself. The dispatcher, struggling to process the enormity of what had been said, asked for clarification. Don's response was matter-of-fact, his tone unchanging. "Yeah, all of them are dead. I'm sitting on my porch. You can come get me." As the dispatcher pressed for details, Don's answers remained brief and devoid of remorse. There was no attempt to justify his actions, no trace of regret in his voice. The sheer detachment with which he spoke painted a picture of a man who had long since crossed the line between anger and apathy. The call, later released to the public, became a chilling artifact of the crime. It captured not only the confession but the terrifying contrast between Don's calm demeanor and the horrors unfolding just feet away. Inside the house, the aftermath of his actions lay in silence. The laughter that had filled the air earlier was gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness. The children's toys, scattered across the floor, served as haunting reminders of the innocence that had been destroyed. The first officers to arrive at the spirit home were met with a scene so devastating it left even seasoned responders shaken. Don's spirit sat on the porch, exactly where he said he'd be, the handgun resting beside him. As officers approached, he offered no resistance. In a final act of control, Don raised the weapon to his own head and pulled the trigger, ending his life before he could face the consequences of his actions. Inside the house, the carnage told a story of unimaginable violence. The bodies of Sarah and her 6 children were found scattered throughout the home, each life extinguished in cold blood. Officers later described the scene as one of the worst they had ever encountered. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like it," one deputy said. "It's something that stays with you, no matter how much you wish it wouldn't." As investigators began to piece together the timeline of events, one question loomed larger than any other. Why? What could drive a man to annihilate his own family in such a brutal and calculated manner? The answers would prove as complex and haunting as the crime itself. The scene at the spirit home left seasoned investigators shaken. Local law enforcement had responded to emergencies before, but nothing could prepare them for what they encountered on September 18, 2014. The house, silent now, was saturated with the echoes of violence that had unfolded hours earlier. Investigators began their grim work, meticulously documenting the scene to piece together the sequence of events. The bodies of Sarah Spirit and her 6 children lay where Don had struck them down, the small, personal details of their lives, a doll here, a toy truck there, frozen in heartbreaking contrast to the brutality of their deaths. Interviews with neighbors painted a picture of a community in utter disbelief. Residents described Don as troubled but never imagined such darkness within him. "You think you know someone," one neighbor said through tears, "but you don't." Others spoke of Sarah's kindness and the joy her children brought to the neighborhood, their voices cracking under the weight of a collective grief. The investigation quickly turned to Don's past, a history riddled with red flags that, in hindsight, seemed glaring. His criminal record spoke volumes. Arrests for domestic violence and illegal firearm possession painted the picture of a man whose volatility often spilled into violence. One particularly damning incident involved a charge of felony child abuse after a confrontation with Sarah. Though records of the case were sealed, law enforcement noted the severity of the accusation. It was a stark reminder of the troubled dynamics within the Spirit household and the looming presence of a man capable of terrifying acts. Investigators also unearthed multiple interactions between the family and child protective services. Over the years, concerns about the children's safety had been raised, but none had led to significant intervention. This failure, some would argue, represented a systemic breakdown that allowed Don's escalating instability to go unchecked. Psychologists analyzing the case delved into Don's psyche, identifying him as a textbook family annihilator. These individuals often harbor a deep sense of inadequacy and are driven by a desire to maintain control in the face of perceived failure. For Don, the loss of his son Kyle, combined with financial struggles and fractured relationships, likely fed into this toxic mindset. The forensic team's findings painted a chilling narrative of the crime. Evidence suggested that Don's actions were premeditated, from the weapon he used to the methodical manner in which he carried out the killings. Each shot told a story of calculated intent, leaving little doubt about the deliberation behind the act. Behavioral experts examined the case, offering chilling insights into Don's state of mind. They described a man consumed by despair but also deeply narcissistic, a man who viewed the annihilation of his family as a final act of control. To Don, experts theorized, this was less about hatred and more about ownership. In his distorted logic, taking their lives was his way of ensuring they could never escape him. Themes of control and despair ran through every aspect of the crime. Don's history of domination within his household suggested a man who thrived on power, and as that power eroded, his actions became more extreme. The crime itself, experts noted, was his ultimate assertion of dominance, a chilling punctuation to a life defined by unresolved rage. Belle, Florida, was a town where life was simple and neighbors felt more like extended family. It was a place where tragedy seemed like a distant concept, something that happened in the headlines, far removed from the dirt roads and sunny fields of their home. But on September 18, 2014, that sense of security shattered, leaving the town engulfed in a grief they could hardly fathom. The response from the community was immediate and deeply personal. Vigils were held at the local park, where residents gathered under the glow of candlelight to mourn together. Silent prayers filled the air, punctuated by the occasional sob of someone who had known the Spirit family intimately. One local pastor spoke during the service, his voice heavy with emotion. "We may never understand why this happened, but we can honor their memory by standing together as a community that refuses to let tragedy define us." His words carried through the crowd, resonating with those who clung to each other for comfort. Messages of support poured in from across the country, letters and flowers arriving at the town's small post office. At the spirit home, mourners left tokens of remembrance, stuffed animals, handwritten notes, and photographs. Some simply stood in silence, unable to put their heartbreak into words. "This isn't the kind of pain you just get over," one longtime resident said. "It stays with you, changes you. Belle will never be the same." The tragedy was not just about the loss of 7 lives, but about the light those lives brought to the world and the void they left behind. Each person in the Spirit family had been a part of the community's fabric, and their absence was felt in deeply personal ways. Neighbors who once heard the laughter of children playing outside now faced an unbearable silence. Teachers who had seen potential in young, eager faces now stared at empty desks. At church, familiar pews once occupied by a vibrant family stood as solemn reminders of the lives cut short. A friend of Sarah's spirit shared a memory that captured her essence. "Sarah had this way of making you feel seen, even on your worst days. She'd tell me, 'We're all struggling, but we've got to keep going for our kids.'" Her resilience had inspired those around her, even in the face of challenges that would have overwhelmed many. The children were remembered not just as individuals, but as a group that brought joy wherever they went. One neighbor recalled how they would race their bikes down the dirt road, their laughter carrying in the wind. "It's the little things you miss the most," she said tearfully. "Hearing them play, seeing their smiles. It's the kind of thing that made you feel lucky just to live here." As news of the calamity spread, the story captured the nation's attention. For days, headlines recounted the horrific details, dissecting every aspect of the crime. While the media coverage brought awareness to the lives lost, it also sparked debate about the ethics of reporting such intimate and painful events. Some outlets focused on the shocking nature of the crime, plastering images of the spirit home across screens and recounting the graphic details in sensational tones. Others attempted to balance the horror with a focus on the lives of the victims, painting a fuller picture of the family beyond the devastation. For the residents of Belle, the media presence felt invasive. Reporters crowded the small town, asking questions that seemed insensitive in the face of such fresh grief. "They wanted sound bites," one resident said bitterly. "But how do you put this kind of pain into words?" Beyond the immediate coverage, the incident prompted a broader societal reckoning. Advocates pointed to the systemic failures that had allowed Dawn's spirit's instability to go unaddressed. Questions arose about the lack of meaningful intervention despite warning signs, including prior domestic violence and interactions with child protective services. Experts called for reforms in child welfare policies, gun control laws, and mental health resources. One child advocate summarized the collective outrage. "This didn't happen in a vacuum. There were opportunities to stop it, and they were missed. If we don't learn from this, we'll fail more families in the future." The Spirit family tragedy exposed deep-rooted societal failures. It highlighted the vulnerabilities in addressing domestic violence, providing mental health care, and enforcing gun restrictions. This event was not just an isolated act of violence, but the culmination of systemic breakdowns that allowed danger to escalate unchecked. Loopholes in firearm regulations enabled a man with a history of aggression and arrests to access weapons. Dawn's spirit, with a criminal past, was able to possess the gun used in this horrific act. Advocates point to such oversights as critical failures requiring urgent reform. Mental health services, particularly in rural areas like Belle, were another glaring omission. Dawn's spirit's volatile behavior, paranoia, and emotional instability were well documented, yet no steps were taken to provide intervention or treatment. Access to care and resources, often stigmatized in small towns, might have offered a lifeline before the crisis spiraled out of control. The absence of effective domestic violence prevention mechanisms is perhaps the most harrowing lesson. Dawn's aggression towards Sarah and his history of child abuse were warning signs that went unheeded. The inability to act decisively left Sarah and her children in harm's way, underscoring the importance of addressing abuse at its earliest signs. This calamity embodied 2 core themes: betrayal and systemic failure. The betrayal came from within the family, a father and grandfather transforming into a perpetrator of unspeakable violence. The systemic failure came from missed opportunities to intervene, allowing his actions to culminate in catastrophe. In the aftermath of this crime, a haunting question emerged. What justice exists when the perpetrator is beyond reach? With Don Spirit's death, the traditional pathways for accountability, trials, testimonies, and sentencing were cut short. For the grieving family and community, this lack of closure compounded the pain. Without the framework of a trial, Bell residents grappled with unresolved emotions. Their collective anger, sadness, and disbelief lingered, with no outlet for resolution. "He robbed us of everything," one community member lamented, and then escaped justice by taking his own life. In response to this void, the town turned its focus inward. Local leaders, churches, and residents worked to rebuild a sense of trust. Support groups emerged, offering spaces for those grappling with loss and trauma to find solace. Educators in the community initiated programs to help children understand and process grief. While these efforts could not undo the devastation, they represented steps toward healing. Through these actions, Bell sought to reclaim its identity, not as a place defined by tragedy but as one united in resilience. The Spirit family's story is not easily forgotten. It serves as a chilling reminder of how fragile safety can be and how critical it is to confront the early signs of instability and violence. The threads of trust that hold families and communities together are delicate, easily unraveled when ignored. This case underscores the importance of action. When warning signs are ignored, the consequences can be catastrophic. Apathy and inaction allow dangers to grow unchecked, and every missed opportunity to intervene becomes a lost chance to save lives. Amid the sorrow, there is a message of resilience. In their mourning, the people of Bell found ways to rebuild, refusing to let the memory of this incident fade without purpose. Their determination to support one another and push for change honors the lives lost, transforming grief into meaningful advocacy. The Spirit family's legacy is a call to action. It compels us to strengthen protections, advocate for those in danger, and demand reforms in broken systems. More than anything, it urges vigilance, to notice, to question, and to act before it's too late. The Spirit family's incident teaches us about the fragility of trust, the depths of despair, and the critical need to recognize warning signs and intervene when it matters most. Years have passed since the calamity that shook Bell, Florida to its core. The small town, once synonymous with safety and simplicity, carries the weight of its scars. But from the depths of grief, a quiet resilience has emerged. Residents have found ways to honor the Spirit family, not through grand gestures, but in the way they've chosen to live. Memorial scholarships in the names of Sarah Spirit and her children now help local students achieve the dreams the family never had the chance to fulfill. At community events, moments of silence are held to reflect on their loss and to remind everyone of the importance of vigilance. The town's recovery is far from complete. For many, the memories linger, triggered by a familiar place or a sound that echoes too closely to the past. Yet, Bell has become a symbol of healing, proving that even in the face of unimaginable pain, hope can endure. The story of the Spirit family is more than a cautionary tale, it's a call to action. Tragedies like this remind us that prevention begins with awareness. Recognizing the warning signs of violence and instability, reaching out for help, and advocating for stronger support systems are steps we can all take to protect the most vulnerable among us. Mental health matters, and breaking the stigma around seeking help is critical. The smallest interventions, a conversation, a referral, a phone call, can sometimes make the biggest difference. As a society, we must commit to being more vigilant, more compassionate, and more proactive. The Spirit family story is not just about loss, it's about lessons. It teaches us that safety requires effort, trust is fragile, and the cost of inaction is too great to bear. Their legacy urges us to reflect on what we can do, not just as individuals but as communities, to prevent such tragedies. Compassion and vigilance are vital tools for prevention. By choosing to care, to notice, and to act, we honor the memory of those we've lost and ensure their story serves as a beacon of change. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Help spread awareness by liking this video and sharing it with others. And if you value thoughtful, respectful true crime storytelling, hit the subscribe button. Together, we can build a community dedicated to learning from the past and creating a safer future. Thank you for watching.